Spring 1945. The war in Europe was almost over, but the silence that followed the thunder of artillery was far from peaceful. As American troops advanced deeper into Germany, they expected surrender, not secrets. What they found instead were tunnels without maps, rooms without names, and files that shouldn't have existed. The Reich had buried its truth, not out of shame, but out of fear of what the victors might see. Fact 1. The hidden city beneath the mountains. In the heart of Lower Silesia, near the Owl Mountains, US and Polish units stumbled upon an underground labyrinth so vast that it seemed impossible to have been built in wartime. It was called Project Reich, Project Giant. For months, locals had whispered about night work, distant explosions, and columns of starving prisoners taken into the hills and never seen again. When the GIs entered, they found enormous concrete tunnels stretching for miles, wide enough for trains, yet unfinished, dripping with moisture, silent but heavy with meaning. Inside, traces of a secret so immense began to surface. Engineers' sketches lay half-burned beside rusted steel girders. Crates marked with the eagle and swastika contained precision instruments and cables still coiled in their wooden spools. The air smelled of oil and wet limestone. American intelligence officers quickly realized that this wasn't just a bunker network. It was an industrial complex buried underground, designed to survive any bombardment. Documents recovered from nearby command posts revealed that Reich was to house entire arms factories, command centers, and possibly even Hitler's new headquarters. The slave laborers who had built it, prisoners from Gross Rosen and Auschwitz, had died by the thousands, buried beneath the very tunnels they dug. Their bodies were never recovered. The mountain had swallowed them. But among the few survivors, testimonies told of blueprints mentioning Sonderanlagen, special facilities, which US interrogators later interpreted as laboratories linked to advanced weapon development. To this day, parts of the complex remain sealed, flooded, or uncharted. After the war, the Soviets cordoned off several entrances, suspecting hidden archives or technology inside. None of those findings were ever shared. American engineers who studied the site described it as the most ambitious subterranean construction project in history, something far beyond Germany's late-war capabilities. For the GIs who walked through those dark halls, it wasn't just another bunker. It was a glimpse into a world the Nazis had tried to preserve underground, a world that was never meant to be seen again. Fact 2. The train that never reached Berlin. In the final weeks of the war, when the Reich was collapsing and Berlin was burning, something strange began moving through the forests of Lower Silesia. A heavily guarded train, painted in camouflage and marked only with the insignia of the Wehrmacht. Witnesses described it as long, sealed, and silent, vanishing into the tunnels near the town of Walbersich. The locals called it der Geisterzug, the ghost train. And for decades after 1945, no one could say where it had gone or what it carried. When American units reached the area, they found the railway lines freshly torn up, as if erased on purpose. A nearby depot held abandoned freight manifests, many stamped with the letter A, the code used for Sondertransport, or special transport. Among the items listed, industrial materials, archives, and art pieces under Reich protection. But there were also blank spaces, entire columns blacked out. The GIs searched the tunnels, but what they found were signs of a departure: scorch marks, broken rails, and air vents blocked with concrete. It was as if an entire train had been swallowed by the mountain. Later testimonies suggested that the ghost train was no ordinary convoy. It had left Breslau in early April, escorted by SS guards, heading west under strict radio silence. According to intercepted messages decoded weeks later, its last recorded position was near Xiaz Castle, another site linked to Project Reich. There, the tracks ended abruptly in a wall of solid rock. Rumors spread quickly through the Allied ranks. Some said the train carried looted art, paintings, sculptures, and gold stolen from occupied Europe. Others whispered it was full of secret documents, even experimental technology. What made the discovery unsettling was how meticulously everything around it had been erased. Bridges along its path were blown up not by Allied air raids, but by German engineers themselves. They had destroyed their own route, and perhaps buried what it carried. In 1946, an OSS report titled Operation Consolidated briefly mentioned unidentified armored train movement, possibly containing Reich financial assets. But when the report reached Washington, the section was redacted. By the 1950s, Soviet authorities had taken over the region and sealed all entrances, declaring them off-limits. For the American soldiers who had seen the evidence, the feeling was the same as in the Owl Mountains. The Reich had not merely lost the war, it had hidden it. Somewhere beneath the soil of Silesia, a train still rested in silence, a tomb of everything the Nazis didn't want the world to find. Fact 3. The castle. That listened to the world high above the town of Wewelsburg, on a hill surrounded by pine and silence, stood a fortress that had survived centuries. To the locals, it was just an old Renaissance castle. But to the SS, it became something entirely different, the ideological heart of their empire, and one of the most secret installations the Allies would uncover. The Americans called it the Listening Castle. The Germans had called it Das Zentrum der Welt, the center of the world. When US forces reached Wewelsburg in the spring of 1945, they found a complex unlike anything else in Germany. The walls were covered with runes, symbols, and geometric designs. Deep beneath the main tower, there was a circular chamber built of black stone. At its center, a sun wheel carved into the floor, surrounded by 12 marble seats. Nothing like it existed in any other SS facility. On the surface, it looked like a ceremonial hall, a place of mysticism and ritual. But when US intelligence began to study it, they discovered something else. Hidden behind false walls were communication cables, radio receivers, and coded message logs from all over occupied Europe. The SS had turned Wewelsburg into a covert intelligence hub, a place where intercepted Allied transmissions were analyzed and encrypted replies sent out under civilian cover. Dozens of operators had lived and worked there, dressed not in uniforms but in plain clothes, pretending to be archivists or historians. Even the local population believed it was a cultural institute. Documents recovered by the Americans revealed that Himmler himself had overseen the transformation. He envisioned the castle as the intellectual and spiritual nucleus of a new Aryan order, a mixture of ideology, espionage, and religion. While its upper floors were dedicated to symbolic chambers and rituals, the lower vaults contained archives of SS research, prisoner files, and prototypes for psychological operations, propaganda experiments designed to manipulate entire populations. When Allied troops approached, most of the staff fled or destroyed evidence. The final defenders detonated part of the northern wing, trying to erase what had been there. But the Americans arrived too soon. They captured fragments of coded instructions that referred to Operation Thule, a secret SS plan involving cultural artifacts and the evacuation of heritage materials from collapsing fronts. For the GIs walking through those silent corridors, the contrast was surreal. Above them, murals of Norse gods and symbols of destiny. Below, piles of listening equipment and half-burned documents marked Top Secret, Sicherheitsdienst. The myth and the machinery of control met in one place. Wewelsburg was not just a castle. It was a mirror of the Nazi mind, a place where fantasy and intelligence merged into something darker, colder, and far more deliberate. The GIs left with more questions than answers. Even after the war, parts of its archive vanished into Soviet hands and others into classified American storage. To this day, no one knows how much was truly recorded inside that stone fortress that listened to the world. Fact 4. The Children of the Reich. The secret. They tried to erase. When American troops entered the Bavarian countryside in April 1945, they expected resistance, not maternity wards. Yet outside the quiet town of Steinhering, near Munich, they stumbled upon an estate, surrounded by fences and guarded by abandoned sentry posts. Inside were dozens of frightened women, some still wearing uniforms of the Helferinnen, female auxiliaries of the Wehrmacht, and nearly 100 newborns. On the gate, a sign read, Heim Hochland. The soldiers didn't yet know what they had found. In time, they would learn its name whispered in interrogation rooms, Lebensborn. The program had been one of Heinrich Himmler's most secret creations, a state-run network of homes meant to engineer the perfect German child. Officially, it was described as a charitable institution helping war widows and mothers. In reality, it was a biological factory built on ideology. Selected SS officers were encouraged to father children with women considered racially pure. Those who gave birth inside Lebensborn homes were promised protection, status, and anonymity. Their children were registered not as individuals, but as assets of the Reich. The GIs who entered the estate were horrified by the orderliness. Cradles in perfect lines, each with a name tag, though many names had been scratched out. Filing cabinets contained detailed records of measurements, hair color, eye pigmentation, even skull proportions. In the basement, boxes of confiscated jewelry and wedding rings, the mother's possessions, had been sorted and catalogued. Some women admitted that not all children had been born there. Many had been taken, stolen from occupied territories, especially Poland, Norway, and Czechoslovakia. The SS had kidnapped thousands of racially suitable infants, erased their identities, and re-registered them as Germans. When parents refused to cooperate, the children were adopted by SS families, their origins buried under layers of paperwork and new names. The Americans called in medical teams and translators. Some nurses, when questioned, broke down in tears. Others defended their work, insisting they had only followed scientific orders. One officer later wrote in his diary, "The babies were beautiful, blonde, blue-eyed, silent. It felt wrong to look at them and know what had been done to make them exist." After the war, the Allies uncovered at least 10 Lebensborn homes across Germany and Austria. The program's files revealed a system so meticulously organized that it had its own genealogical department, tracing Aryan bloodlines back generations. Many of the children vanished in the chaos of 1945, hidden by nurses, adopted illegally, or taken east by retreating units. For decades, their true origins remained unknown. Some only discovered the truth in old archives or from fading photographs found in attics. What the GIs uncovered that day wasn't just a secret program. It was the physical embodiment of a twisted dream, the Reich's attempt to create humanity in its own image. In the silence of that nursery, amid the smell of milk and antiseptic, the soldiers realized they weren't liberating a facility. They were stepping into the ruins of an ideology that had tried to play God. Fact 5. The Factory of Shadows Beneath the Earth. In March 1945, a patrol from the U.S. Third Army entered a small valley near the town of Nordhausen in central Germany. The air smelled of fuel and damp stone. The soldiers followed a narrow railway track that disappeared into the side of a mountain. They thought it was a mine until they went inside. What they found became one of the most disturbing discoveries of the entire European campaign. Mittelwerk, the secret underground factory where the Nazis built their miracle weapons. The tunnel stretched for over 2 miles beneath the Kohnstein mountain. Their walls were blackened with smoke, cables hung from the ceilings like veins. Scattered across the floor were half-assembled fuselages, the unmistakable shapes of V-2 rockets. The same weapons that had fallen on London, Antwerp, and Liège only months before. Yet what shocked the GIs most was not the machinery, but the silence and the bodies. Hundreds of them lying where they had fallen, emaciated, nameless, still wearing striped camp uniforms. The Americans soon realized the truth. The rockets that had terrified Europe were built by slaves. Over 20,000 prisoners from the nearby Dora Mittelbau concentration camp had been worked to death here, digging tunnels, assembling engines, welding casings under constant threat of beatings or execution. The Germans had hidden their deaths beneath the mountain, just as they hid their weapons. For every V-2 launched, more men had died building it than civilians killed by its impact. In one chamber, U.S. engineers found blueprints stamped top secret Peenemünde. It was clear that when Allied bombers destroyed the original rocket base on the Baltic coast, production had simply been moved underground. The order had come directly from Himmler and Albert Speer. Build below ground, beyond the reach of bombs, no matter the cost in human life. The soldiers who entered that mountain wrote later that the air felt thick with ghosts. They saw bunks stacked 5 high, food bowls filled with dust, and the whip marks on the walls. In one corner, they found a chalk inscription in French. Nous ne reviendrons jamais. We will never return. After the discovery, American intelligence teams sealed off the tunnels and began an operation codenamed Paperclip. The goal? Capture the scientists, not punish them. Within weeks, Werner von Braun and his team, who had overseen rocket development, were quietly moved to U.S. custody. They were the architects of both horror and progress, the same minds who built the V-2 would later send America to the moon. For the GIs, that was a truth almost too heavy to bear. In those tunnels, surrounded by the machinery of death and invention, they understood how far the Reich had gone to preserve its power, not in the open fields of battle, but in the hidden depths of the earth, where progress and cruelty had fused into one. Fact 6. The Vault of Vanished Art. When the war was ending, American troops entering southern Bavaria expected to find retreating soldiers. Instead, in early May 1945, a small reconnaissance unit from the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division stumbled upon a strange convoy of trucks abandoned near the village of Altusay, Austria. Inside one, they found a crate marked with the imperial seal of Austria and a note written in German. Eigentum des Führers, do not open. Property of the Führer. The trucks had been headed toward a mine, the salt mines of Altusay, and what lay hidden there would become one of the most breathtaking discoveries of the entire war. Deep beneath the mountain, through tunnels lined with salt crystals, the soldiers entered what looked like a cathedral of theft. The mine's vast chambers were filled with wooden crates stacked floor to ceiling. Each was carefully labeled, each containing the stolen soul of Europe. There were paintings by Vermeer, Rembrandt, and Michelangelo, altarpieces stripped from cathedrals, golden chalices, tapestries, and statues once adored in the palaces of Paris, Warsaw, and Vienna. The Nazis had stored over 6,000 works of art inside that mine, masterpieces they planned to exhibit in Hitler's Dream Museum in Linz, the so-called Führer Museum. But the mine was more than a warehouse. It was a secret the Nazis had tried desperately to erase. When defeat became inevitable, Hitler ordered all art hidden in sensitive areas to be destroyed to prevent Allied capture. The SS commandant of Altusay received explosives and orders to blow up the tunnels. Only by defiance, from local miners, art curators, and even a few German officers, was the destruction prevented. They quietly removed the fuses, replacing the charges with harmless sand. When the Americans arrived, they found the entrances rigged but intact. The GIs walked through the cavern with lamps, brushing dust from names that sounded almost mythical. The Ghent altarpiece, the Madonna of Bruges, the Astronomer by Vermeer. Some paintings had bullet holes, others were covered in mold from years underground. It was like stepping into the wreckage of civilization itself. Beauty saved, but broken. The discovery of Altusay was not only about art, it revealed a larger network of looting that spanned the entire continent. Hitler's agents had catalogued, crated, and shipped treasures under the authority of the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, an organization dedicated to cultural plunder. They had taken not just possessions, but identity, entire heritages erased for ideology. After the discovery, a special Allied unit, the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives section, known later as the Monuments Men, secured the site. It took months to transport the art back to rightful owners, and decades for the stories to be told. For the GIs who first stepped into that shimmering darkness, the realization was immediate and haunting. The Reich hadn't only tried to conquer nations, it had tried to steal their soul. Hidden beneath a mountain of salt lay the evidence of a regime that wanted to decide which parts of humanity deserved to survive. Fact 7. The secret of the poisoned sea. In the summer of 1945, long after Germany's surrender, Allied patrol ships cruising the Baltic Sea began encountering something strange. Rusted barrels, bobbing silently on the gray surface, some leaking an oily yellow liquid. Fishermen who pulled them up reported burns on their hands and faces. No one understood what they were, until British intelligence admitted the truth. They were part of Operation Davy Jones, the Allies' desperate solution to one of the Nazis' last hidden horrors: hundreds of thousands of tons of chemical weapons. When the Third Reich collapsed, its factories were found overflowing with poison gas. Tabun, sarin, mustard gas, arsenals intended for a chemical war that never came. The stockpiles were scattered across depots in Germany, Denmark, and Poland. Some were hidden in tunnels, others in barns disguised as fertilizer storage. Hitler had forbidden their use, fearing retaliation, but by 1945, his scientists had produced enough gas to kill every human being in Europe several times over. For the GIs who discovered these caches, the sight was otherworldly. Row upon row of metal drums stacked like tombs, each labeled with a colored cross indicating the type of agent inside. The smell was sweet and metallic. Engineers entering the bunkers had to wear gas masks and rubber suits. Many of them didn't yet know how deadly the chemicals were. In one facility near Lübeck, several soldiers collapsed after opening a single container. The vapors alone were lethal. The Allies had a problem: how to dispose of the largest collection of chemical weapons ever assembled. The answer, decided hastily in the months after victory, was brutal and simple: dump them into the sea. Between 1945 and 1948, Allied ships loaded with captured German munitions set sail into the Baltic and the North Sea. They carried over 300,000 tons of shells, bombs, and barrels. The orders were clear: no maps, no records, no witnesses. American and British crews watched as cranes tipped the cargo overboard, the metal thudding against the hull before disappearing into the dark water. Some barrels ruptured on impact, leaving oily slicks that shimmered in the moonlight. The men weren't told what was inside. They were just told not to smoke. For decades, the operation remained classified. Only in the 1960s did fishermen begin finding the evidence: twisted metal, strange burns, dead zones where no fish lived. The sea had become a silent graveyard of gas. For the soldiers who had first entered those bunkers in 1945, the realization was chilling. The Nazis had planned a war of chemicals they never unleashed. The Allies, in trying to erase it, had simply hidden it beneath the waves. Even now, the Baltic still carries that invisible scar, the ocean holding its breath over a secret no one wanted to remember. Fact 8. The bunker that wasn't on any map. In April 1945, as Berlin burned and the Reich crumbled, American reconnaissance units combed through the forests of Thuringia, an area dense with pine and mystery. Local civilians whispered of a place called Jonastal, a restricted valley guarded by the SS where nobody returned from. When U.S. engineers finally entered, they found a construction site unlike anything else in occupied Germany. A series of massive tunnels, some collapsed, others sealed, and not a single blueprint to explain their purpose. The entrances were carved into limestone cliffs, reinforced with concrete and steel doors. Inside, the tunnels extended for miles. Electric cables ran through the ceilings, ventilation ducts lined the walls, and deep grooves on the floors showed where rail carts had once moved heavy loads. The GIs had seen plenty of underground bunkers before, but this one was different, too vast for storage, too complex for defense. It felt like something meant to survive forever. Among the rubble, they found crates marked Reich Sicherheitshauptamt, the Reich Security Main Office, alongside machine parts, laboratory glassware, and electrical instruments. Even more confusing were papers signed by engineers from Organization Todt, the group responsible for Hitler's most secret construction projects. The documents referred cryptically to Object S3. Object S3. The rest of the files had been burned. Rumors spread fast among the American troops. Some believed they had found a secret weapons facility for the V3 cannon, a supergun capable of reaching London. Others thought it was a command bunker for Hitler himself, an alternate Führer headquarters for when Berlin fell. But when the Americans interrogated captured German engineers, the answers grew darker. They spoke of new energy, uranium purification, and experiments that could end the war in a single strike. U.S. intelligence soon connected Jonastal with Operation Uran Project, the Nazi atomic research effort. Though Germany never built a functioning nuclear weapon, evidence suggested the site was part of a last-ditch attempt to restart uranium enrichment deep underground, safe from Allied bombers. Samples of radioactive material found in nearby tunnels were quietly shipped to the United States for analysis. No official report was ever made public. After the Americans withdrew, the Soviets took over the area and sealed it entirely. They dynamited entrances, placed armed guards, and declared it a restricted military zone. For decades, East German citizens were forbidden to approach it. Even after the Cold War ended, access remained limited. For the soldiers who first entered Jonastal, it was like staring into the unfinished blueprint of an apocalypse. A hidden city carved beneath a mountain, built in silence while the Reich above was dying. Whatever Object S3 truly was, a command center, a nuclear lab, or both, it embodied the final madness of a regime trying to bury its future under stone. To this day, the tunnels of Jonastal remain half-sealed and half-forgotten, a monument not to what the Nazis built, but to what they were still willing to dream of, even as their world turned to ash. Fact 9. The camp that disappeared overnight. In late April 1945, when American armored divisions pushed through southern Germany, they began to encounter strange absences, entire facilities that should have been there, but weren't. Prisoners spoke of a camp deep in the forest near the town of Landsberg am Lech, known only by its code, Kaufering 4. It was said to be part of the Dachau complex, where Jewish and political prisoners were forced to build underground aircraft factories for the Messerschmitt Me-262, Hitler's jet fighter. But when the GIs finally reached it, they didn't find a camp. They found ashes. The guards had fled days earlier, leaving behind charred remains of wooden barracks, smoldering pits, and hundreds of bodies too weak to move. Others had been burned alive when the SS set fire to the huts to destroy evidence. The survivors, skeletal, trembling, many blinded by smoke, told the Americans that orders had come directly from Munich. Erase everything. Nothing must fall into Allied hands. The soldiers, hardened by months of combat, stood silent. A young GI named Robert Heller later wrote in his notebook, "The ground was still warm. You could smell the wood, the flesh, the gasoline, all mixed together. It was like they had tried to burn history itself." The Kaufering network had been one of the Reich's most secret projects. It consisted of 11 subcamps built to produce fuselages and engines underground, safe from bombing. Thousands of Jewish prisoners from Hungary, Poland, and France had been transported there under the promise of work assignments. In reality, they were used as disposable labor to dig tunnels and pour concrete in freezing mud. Every few weeks, trains would arrive with new workers and leave with the dead. When the Americans pieced together what had happened, they realized the SS had begun evacuating the camps in a frenzy, executing anyone who couldn't walk. Entire convoys of prisoners were forced onto death marches toward Dachau. Many collapsed along the roads and were left behind. Those who stayed were ordered into the barracks, locked in, and the buildings set alight. In the ashes of Kaufering 4, the GIs found traces of what the Nazis had tried to hide: blueprints of underground hangars, correspondence between Messerschmitt engineers, and crates of tools labeled Luftwaffe, secret. But they also found children's shoes, hairbrushes, and identity tags, remnants of a human world erased. After the liberation, American photographers and war correspondents were brought to document the site. The images they captured became some of the most haunting in all of World War II, skeletal survivors standing amid ruins, their faces blank not from fear, but from having seen the end of everything. The Nazis had tried to burn their crimes. The Americans arrived too soon. The ashes still smoked. Kaufering became the first evidence shown in the Nuremberg trials to prove the deliberate destruction of camps before liberation. It stood as a grim example of how, even in defeat, the regime's final instinct was to hide, not its weapons, but its guilt. For the GIs who walked through that scorched valley, there was no victory that day, only silence. Fact 10. The files that were never supposed to be found. When the war ended, the American 7th Army was ordered to secure all surviving Nazi administrative buildings across Bavaria. Most were half-burned or looted, filled with the routine debris of a collapsing state. But inside a quiet monastery near the town of Freising, soldiers discovered something else entirely. Rooms stacked floor to ceiling with steel filing cabinets, each drawer locked, labeled, and numbered. The monks had been forced to abandon the building weeks earlier. The SS had turned it into a temporary archive. The sign on one door simply read, Ahnenerbe. That word meant little to the GIs at first. But when translators arrived and began opening the drawers, the shock was immediate. The Ahnenerbe was the SS's Ancestral Heritage Institute, a secret research organization created by Heinrich Himmler to prove the racial superiority of the so-called Aryan race. Inside those cabinets were over 40,000 files, anthropological studies, maps, field reports, and personal letters. Some documented expeditions to Tibet and the Arctic. Others described skull measurements of prisoners in occupied Poland and France. Every folder was stamped Geheime Reichssache, top secret state matter. But beneath the pseudoscience and mysticism lay something even darker. Mixed among the research files were medical records, autopsy reports, lists of test subjects, and correspondence between SS doctors and concentration camp commandants. The documents detailed experiments in sterilization, hypothermia, malaria infection, and high-altitude endurance, performed not on volunteers, but on prisoners. Many reports ended with the same phrase, Versuch beendet, experiment terminated. The soldiers who found the archive had never seen bureaucracy used like this, cruelty disguised as paperwork. Every atrocity had a form, a reference number, a signature. One folder listed the weight loss of a child over 10 days. Another recorded how long it took a man to freeze to death in a tank of ice water. It was horror organized with the precision of a tax office. U.S. intelligence officers sealed the site within hours. Over the following weeks, teams from the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, and the U.S. Army Medical Corps began photographing and cataloging the documents. Many were later used as evidence in the Nuremberg doctors' trial. Others were quietly shipped to America under Operation Paperclip, where scientists who had designed the experiments were interrogated and in some cases recruited. What disturbed the soldiers most wasn't only what the papers revealed, but what they implied, that behind the grand speeches and slogans of the Reich was a cold, administrative machine that measured, cataloged, and murdered through forms and stamps. One young translator wrote home, "There were no monsters in these files, only signatures." The Ahnenerbe archive was more than a record of crimes. It was a mirror held up to the regime's soul, a system where ideology became science and science became murder. The Nazis had tried to destroy those documents before fleeing, but the fire had gone out too soon. When the Americans arrived, the smoke still lingered, and the truth was waiting in the drawers. Fact 11. The scientists who changed sides before the smoke cleared. In the first weeks after Germany's surrender, while most of Europe was still counting its dead, American intelligence officers were already hunting something else: mines. Deep in Bavaria, U.S. military convoys began collecting crates not of gold or art, but of blueprints, research journals, and laboratory samples. Their targets weren't soldiers or officials. They were physicists, engineers, and chemists, the people who had built the Reich's secret weapons. It was the birth of Operation Paperclip, a mission so urgent and so morally gray that it would remain classified for decades. The first major find came near Garmisch-Partenkirchen. Hidden inside a schoolhouse were hundreds of rocket components, instruments, and sketches. Among them was a name the Allies already knew: Werner von Braun. When American officers reached his team's hideout in the Bavarian Alps, they found engineers exhausted, hiding from the SS, carrying a white flag made from a bed sheet. Von Braun, still wearing his Luftwaffe flight jacket, surrendered willingly, telling the soldiers, "We want to work for the right side this time." Within weeks, the US had quietly extracted more than 120 German scientists, along with thousands of pages of research on rocketry, aerodynamics, and propulsion. The same men who had designed the V-2 missiles, weapons that had killed over 20,000 people in London and Antwerp, were flown to America, given new identities and new lives. Their records were cleansed, their crimes erased in exchange for knowledge. For the GIs who had seen the death camps, the discovery was sickening. Many had walked through the tunnels of Mittelwerk, seen the corpses of slave laborers who built those rockets with bare hands, and now were told that the men who ordered it were being offered jobs by the same army that liberated them. "They should hang," one officer said. But Washington had already made its decision. The Cold War had begun before the last war had truly ended. Von Braun and his team were taken to Fort Bliss, Texas, under heavy secrecy. There, they began testing rocket systems using the very blueprints recovered from German bunkers. Within a decade, their work would evolve into the Redstone and Saturn projects, the same technology that launched America into space. In the shadows of victory, the line between enemy and asset had blurred. The Americans weren't alone. The Soviets were doing the same, seizing scientists and equipment across their occupied zone. The race for technology became a race for ghosts, men whose knowledge had been built on the suffering of others. When the first V-2 was successfully launched in the US in 1946, some soldiers who had been in Germany recognized its shape immediately. One veteran of the Third Army whispered, "That's the same sound they made over London." For those men, the triumph of science was haunted by memory. They had uncovered one of the Nazis' most guarded secrets, that the war they thought they'd ended had already been traded for another one, fought not with bullets, but with ideas stolen from the ruins. Fact 12. The Fortress of Silence Beneath the Alps. In the closing days of April 1945, as American units swept across southern Bavaria, scouts reported a mysterious stronghold in the mountains near Berchtesgaden. The locals called it Der Obersalzberg, a name whispered for years but never fully understood. Officially, it was a government retreat. In reality, it was the core of Hitler's Alpine fortress plan, a self-sustaining redoubt built to outlast defeat, fortified with tunnels, armories, and escape routes that burrowed into the Alps like veins of iron. When the GIs of the 3rd Infantry Division climbed the winding road toward the compound, they found charred ruins above ground, bombed by the RAF days earlier. But beneath the wreckage, behind a collapsed entrance, they discovered an underground city. Miles of corridors carved into the granite, reinforced with steel doors and lined with ammunition boxes, fuel tanks, food rations, and command maps. This was where Hitler had planned to make his last stand. In one chamber stood a vast hall, its walls covered in marble. On a table, still intact, lay the engraved insignia of the Reich. Next to it, untouched, a bottle of French champagne from 1938, and 2 crystal glasses. In the adjoining rooms, American soldiers found telecommunication lines leading deep underground, a ventilation system capable of sustaining hundreds of people for months, and a secret railway tunnel meant to connect directly to Salzburg. The deeper they went, the more it felt like descending into the mind of a regime that refused to die. Among the documents left behind were plans for relocating government ministries, archives, and even cultural treasures from Berlin to this underground fortress. The project's codename was Alpenfestung, Alpine Fortress. It had been the final illusion sold by Nazi propaganda. that somewhere in the mountains the Führer's forces were preparing a last counterattack. But what the Americans found instead were empty warehouses, half-stocked kitchens, and files full of abandoned dreams. The Empire had prepared its tomb with military precision. In the lowest level of the complex, GIs found what looked like a personal office, Hitler's own mountain retreat, known as the Berghof. The walls were lined with burnt photographs, including one of Eva Braun. The last entry in the guest log was dated April 20th, 1945, Hitler's birthday. 10 days later, he would be dead in Berlin. The Obersalzberg complex wasn't a fortress of resistance. It was a fortress of denial, the physical embodiment of a regime that believed it could hide from history itself. When the Americans finally sealed the tunnels, one soldier etched a simple line into the concrete near the entrance: "No empire lasts forever." When the guns fell silent in 1945, the war did not end. It merely sank beneath the surface. In bunkers, tunnels, and files, the Nazis had buried the evidence of their empire, hoping that time would erase what conscience could not. But the GIs who uncovered those secrets saw more than the ruins of a regime. They saw the cost of its lies. Every mountain they entered, every vault they opened, revealed the same truth: that evil hides not only in battlefields, but in blueprints, in silence, in order, and that even when defeated, it always tries to bury the proof. The Allies unearthed it, and the world has been reckoning with it ever since.